Chapter 3 now in our quest for the ultimate flop. Our assistant Zemi brings us some coffee, which tastes terrible. I consider perhaps hiring an office assistant, and Zemi says we can barely afford a best boy, let alone an office boy. Best boy referring to the head electrician on a movie set. So if we can barely afford that, we're in serious trouble. Now, we have a bit of visual comparison here between our office and Krogan's office. We have paperwork piled up with memos and set designs, and we have a report from Zemi. So it looks like we have actual data telling us how things are going with our production. And it looks like the stress meter for our crew is in the red. We are on budget apparently, but our crew is feeling 67% stress. Now, stress level is not always directly resulting in either a success or a flop. A crew could have a great time making a movie that turns out to be an enormous flop, and they can have a miserable time making a movie that turns out to be a huge success. Obviously, we want to make all the wrong choices, and stress, therefore, is not a concern of ours. In fact, Daisy wouldn't mind if stresses were even higher than 67%. And now why this is, and Zemi tells us it's morale. If you work people too hard, push too much responsibility on them, the quality of their work starts to suffer. That depends. Yeah, some people thrive under pressure, some people fold under pressure. But of course, it is up to the manager. The manager is the one responsible for the stress level. And whether a crew thrives on stress or collapses under stress, it is up to the manager to know what that is, what the stress level, what the appropriate stress level should be, and to manage around that. Now, that is actually not so much the goal of the director of a project, but more like the producer. The producer is the one who is hiring all these people and is therefore responsible, including the director. So the director, and one thing you want to get is a director crew combination that would be obviously efficient and produce good work. But anyway, let's see what this means for us. Now, there's other kinds of meters here, and it looks like we're advised to not burn out ourselves, and we think that's funny, and we imagine a personal stress meter here at 59%. And what do we put first in our professional life, the project or the people? I mean, it's a binary there, the project or the people. I mean, in a way, the project is the people, and vice versa. But we understand, remember the point earlier about work-life balance. Those, you should have work-life balance to reduce your stress. And now personal relationships, looks like we do have, I guess, we have a potential relationship here with the actor Vincent Cooper, which appears to be at a low level. So 43%, I guess that's a level we actually want to increase. We want to increase our potential relationship with Vincent Cooper. And then we have our niece Josie at a high level, 63%, because obviously we invited Josie to come to the set whenever she wanted. Vincent Cooper, we had, remember, dismissed from the diner and didn't want to speak to him a lot. And I'm going to continue that in that vein. I'm going to try to make my relation with the actor worse and with my niece better, because the idea is that will be the worst thing for the project. And now that self-reflection, fine. File the report away, keep it up to date. You can review these summaries anytime by using the Show Stats button. Okay, so let's press that, Show Stats. Here is our stats button. And all right, and then you can see the movie statistics. So, all right, so the stats not only have our personal meters and our crew stress level, but also the project itself and the kind of project that it is. And it looks like we are pushing originality, intellectuality, something that's relaxing, but of a quality that seems higher than average yet. I find that to be a very odd combination. Okay, let's get back to the game. And it looks like I'm not happy with the way the current script draft looks like. It looks like I'm not happy with how original it is and how intellectual it is, how relaxing it is, and the quality of it. So what am I going to do? Am I going to approve it as is, spend more work on it, or hire a writer? Let's just approve it as is. Zemi, of course, backs us up, says, let's go ahead. Now the director. The moment's finally here. You've been avoiding the decision. Time is running out. So the director has to be hired. Now, this is something about the director's role in a production is one that I think, even though we all talk about the director as being the one responsible for, let's say, the vision, and if you're going to evaluate a movie from an analytical point of view, or even your opinion of something like its thematic meaning or something like that, if you had to pick one person who would be responsible for all of what we saw in the movie, we usually talk about the director. We don't usually talk about the producer, even though it's the producer who hired the director. If you, when they do the Academy Awards every year, and the award for Best Picture is separate from the award for Best Director. The Best Picture Academy Award goes to the producer, the one who came up with the whole, all the financing and hiring all the people who worked on it, including the director. But for some reason, we usually talk about the director as the one with the vision. But remember, we're talking about the 1950s here, and this was before there was this concept of the auteur, of the director as artist. That would come later. Actually, it was happening in the 1950s in France, in French film criticism, but not so much in the US. That came later in the 1960s and into the 1970s, recognizing the director as artist. Now, you did have some directors who would be in publicity, and even in their own way, like the way they would present themselves to the public, they would be artists. Someone like Orson Welles, for example, and like Alfred Hitchcock. So in the 1950s, you had Alfred Hitchcock making movies that would have the credit a film by Alfred Hitchcock. But that wasn't like a thing across the board with all productions, putting the director's name almost above the title as the most important thing about it. Alfred Hitchcock was a very special case, someone who was a celebrity in and of himself, and had worked and was working in television and in radio and in print media and in movies, someone who was basically a mogul of sorts, like the mogul of suspense. But anyway, we have to make a decision about the director. How are we going to do this? Do we hire someone competent but cheap? Do we hire someone famous with prestige, or am I going to direct this myself? I'm going to direct The Green Promise myself, because I really do want this to fail. Yeah, you could say that as an analogy, perhaps, a writer producer choosing to direct themselves is sort of like the criminal defendant choosing to defend themselves in court. You think you know how to do it, but when it comes to it, you're better off just hiring someone to manage that for you. But in this case, we are going to hire ourselves to enact the vision on the screen that we are producing. And now we have screen tests. And the screen test, a screen test is not like an audition. An audition, it is sort of like an audition, but it's basically an advanced stage in the audition process, where you're basically saying, I have very few people here who I would choose from, people who have already kind of shown interest in the project, and now you want to put them on camera with makeup, with costuming and all of that, just to see how they would look in the movie itself. So it's kind of an advanced stage of the audition process, where you're basically down to just a few people, or maybe even just one person. You've hired the person, and now you just want to see how they look on the screen and maybe make adjustments for costuming and makeup. Now we have the first time cameras are rolling on the lot. So these screen tests are the first time talent is stepping onto the sound stage. Talent, that's another word for actors and actresses, the talent. Also the players, you can call them the players. You're starting to feel, all right, we're making movies now, right? Cameras are turning on. And it looks like there's a packed stage here. And here's Josie. So Josie is here and shares with us some trivia that Mr. Richards, who I guess is one of the stagehands, worked on Suspicion with Joan Fontaine. Suspicion, a movie directed by Alfred Hitchcock, who we've just mentioned. So someone who knows the work of Alfred Hitchcock. I didn't know that. And I'm saying now, tell me more about your experience, Mr. Richards, working on Suspicion with Joan Fontaine? Or do I say, no, get to work? Well, I want to emphasize on this set the lack of a work ethic, because I do want this to be a failed production. So let's encourage chit chat and not so much focused on lighting and sound equipment and that sort of thing. So I'm never too busy to swap stories. Says, of course I'm too busy, but it's important to build relations with the crew. All right. Now, ironically, I may be, with these choices, reducing the stress level of the crew, but I will also be jeopardizing the quality of the movie if everyone is distracted just doing gossip or during the production. It's one of those things that, it's unfortunate that, that you have to make these choices between the project or the people. But remember, there's high stakes here. When the cameras are turned on and production is happening, that time money is flying out the door and you can't get that money back. So the stress is important because you need to focus, you need to get it right as soon as possible. And if you're spending too much time doing other things, your production will maybe not even finish. But if it does finish, it may be so bad that you'll never make your money back. So it's understandable. I mean, it's a tough choice, but it's a tough industry. It looks like I brought Josie a little present, and it's a manila envelope, a bunch of issues of the Hollywood Reporter. So the Hollywood Reporter, which was which was a publication of the time, one of the leading publications. The other one was Variety. And there were other ones as well, but Hollywood Reporter and Variety, and they still are the two major, let's say, business and industry publications. And inside baseball about the industry, yeah. And Josie has not read them. She's very happy. Okay, things are going well with Josie. And it looks like I can choose who the leader of this motley group of bashful socialites is. Remember, this is a social satire romantic comedy set in Morocco that has a downer ending and the cast of nobodies. But I guess there does have to be a leader of the group. Should that be a man or a woman? I don't think this really matters, so let's just say man. And the best person for the part was a friend of mine, right? That's what I said. I'm going to hire my friends to make this movie. And enter my friend's first name. Well, let's call the friend Carter. Name just occurred to me. Enter your friend's last name. Let's call him Carter Whitlock. Confirmed name Carter Whitlock. All right. So the masthead talent on the marquee will be introducing Carter Whitlock as the leader of the bashful socialites in The Green Promise from Polka Dot Bowtie Entertainment. It says that'll give the censors something to chew on. The censors, that refers to the production code, the system of censorship that was in place at the time in the 1950s. It was around since the mid 1930s. I mean, it was around before that, but the code was really put into practice in the mid 1930s to censor content on film. So to make every movie available for all audiences. And this was still the case even after World War II. There weren't, the rating system did not come into place until the late 1960s, when there was simply this demand that there be movies for adults and not so much movies for everyone, which is what every movie basically had to be. Every movie had to pass the production code system, and the censor, if they saw anything in the movie that was not appropriate for all audiences, they would simply demand that it be taken out. So that's what they mean by censors. Now, a short time later, Carter arrives on set, is so happy to be the lead of the motley group of socialites. And am I absolutely confident, or am I trying not to worry? I am absolutely confident in Carter's ability to play this part. Now, the first time through is a little rusty. The screen test, that is, everyone's sweating. The ventilation system is on the fritz. I call for a second run through while the technicians fix the air conditioning. All right, and the second run through is even worse than the first. So the heat from the broken ventilation system is taking its toll on Carter and the crew. So what do? Do I tell the crew to hurry things up? Or do I simply crack a joke to relieve the tension? Or do I reschedule the screen test for another day, even though it'll cost us? That's what we do. We reschedule for another day. because I just don't have any responsibility I don't have any feeling of responsibility over the schedule or the budget, which are two ways to quickly lose your business in the film industry. It's ridiculous to expect people to work in this heat. And the priority, I guess, for me is to get this repaired. Everyone seems relieved. And all right, so Vincent Cooper, the actor, has actually come on as assistant director. He should be. The right decision was to make Vincent Cooper the lead star, but instead Vincent Cooper is doing assistant directing job. An assistant director is basically the one who gets the set crew in place and also manages the supporting cast and the background players of a set. So it's the assistant director that manages that is the one who gets everything set up so the director can then say action. You're basically herding cats as the assistant director. And I guess that's what Vincent Cooper is doing for us here. And as the day drags on, my attention wanders. I'm noticing a particular grip, working with the light riggers, someone who's making a strong impression on me. There's something attractive about about the precision of this grip. Not to mention the man himself, the woman himself, the person behind it. It looks like this is a romantic interest for me here, which is a big mistake for a set for the producer, director, writer to get into a relationship with someone in the crew. But now I can choose, okay, the man, the woman, or the person behind it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So I'll say the person behind it. I wait for the quiet moment to introduce myself as Daisy Flack. Welcome to the crew, very attractive grip person. And the person has a drawling Midwestern accent. Okay, so they're not from LA. And I want to pursue a relationship with this person because that will be very bad for the production. So I'm actually going to be a very warm and inviting person here. So I'm going to say, call me Daisy, please, with a smile. They smile back. I'm really buttering this person up. I'm surprised you haven't been promoted. You seem so talented. And this person looks down, feeling embarrassed, which I find endearing. And this person says, well, I speak my mind a lot. And if this person sees someone mistreated, that gets this person very upset. And that makes them sometimes difficult to work with. And they further tell me that I seem to have a reputation for being a hard ass on the set. Really? That's not what I'm trying to cultivate here. I'm trying to cultivate a very loose, relaxed, and basically a disorganized and irresponsible set. So I better change this impression as soon as possible, which is good. I mean, so this will get me in well with this very attractive grip, because the grip doesn't seem to want to have a hard driving set, and I certainly don't want that either. Maybe I should try to treat my crew a little better. Yeah, let's do that. And this is pleasing to the grip, regretting any disrespect. No disrespect meant, and I say that's fine. Haven't you heard? And the whole says the whole shebang started with me mouthing off to my own boss. Daisy admitting, like, it was her impulsive quitting at the studio that started this whole thing. So a little honesty is good. You know, being a little iconoclastic is a good thing, is what I'm saying to this grip, because that's how I started being an independent filmmaker, by basically walking out of my job and mouthing off to the boss. Well, we'll see how that turns out. And we have to give a name to this grip, and just doesn't matter. So Tarn, interesting name, Tarn Mackenzie, sounds fine. Great to meet you, Tarn. And you're so busy. So what am I going to do? Invite them to dinner. Says I'd like to invite them to dinner, but I'm not sure that would be appropriate. See, that's the correct thing to think. Like, you'd like to do it, but you know it's not appropriate. But I'm going to invite them to dinner because I'm stupid. Look, I know we've just met. Tarn flushes. Gee, I don't know what to say. And it's one of those like awkward, like, we're waiting to see who decides what to do here. And it looks like it looks like the grip wants to get out of this, so I'm gonna let the grip go. And the grip gives me a little salute and turns back to work. And then it says the narrator of this says, that certainly went well, Daisy. No wonder you're still single. Yeah, no wonder you're still single, Daisy. The rest of the day is uneventful. And now, but something happens. You roll around just in time to see a 15-foot crane crash over onto its side. A gaffer has managed to dive out of the way, and standing at my side is Josie. And Josie, she noticed that something was wrong with the crane. That didn't look like enough sandbags were there. And then it says union regulations say you have to sandbag anything over 600 pounds. That's right. That's right. Union regulations. This is a good point to make, that we are in a union set here. And Josie just about saved the life of the gaffer, who knew this about the sandbagging, and luckily brought it to their attention. So how should I handle this? Do I tell my niece, stop butting in? Do I take responsibility myself? Well, no, I'm not going to do that. Or say family comes first and scold the gaffer for his mistake. Well, family comes first. Sorry. And so I call the gaffer sloppy, and I'm saying don't get distracted. And the gaffer apologizes, turns back to work, says, we'll work harder. Oh no, maybe I shouldn't have chosen that. I don't want them to work harder. I want them to be, see, what I don't want them to be is stressed out over the movie. I don't want them to worry about the movie at all, because I want the movie to be bad. That's my goal here, is to have a terrible production. So I don't want the crew to be stressed out over the movie. However, I do want them to be stressed out over personal issues, that like me favoring my niece, like me having inappropriate relationships with people on the crew, like that kind of stress I want, because that will lead to more disorganization. In a way, I hope this game figures that out, that I want the crew to be stressed in this way, but not in that way. But I guess we'll see how that works out. And I say to my niece, great job. And I do say the film set is a dangerous place, which it is. It can be a very dangerous place. And I feel some guilt about having my niece there in danger. But again, my sister, as it points out here, is not a very good mother. So I'm doing what my sister couldn't, right? And I tell Josie to stick by my assistant. So stick by Zemi from now on, not to be a distraction to the crew. Oh, that's not what I want to say. I want Josie to get more involved. In fact, I want to hire Josie as the assistant director. That's what I want to do here. Although Josie might actually do a better job than Vincent at assistant directing. So maybe it's a good thing just to have Josie to the side, right? Because it looks like Josie would be a very good thing to have on a film set. So to have Josie off the set would be a good thing for this narrative of making a bad production. So I'm happy with this. Okay, now at the end of the day, I'm bushed. I stop at the store and I see a headline on the newspaper that says that Lloyd Krogan begins production on a new romantic comedy. All right, I guess that means Lloyd Krogan is stealing my idea. Now I think we're in a total fantasy land here. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely absurd. I don't know what that means. Am I just being paranoid? That could be it, right? Lloyd Krogan may not be stealing anything from me. I just might be being paranoid. If Lloyd Krogan is stealing my idea, that would sort of mean that Lloyd Krogan deserves to lose the studio. And this is sort of what happened to the old mogul, like the old studio heads from the classical period. They were in danger by certainly through the 1950s and in the 1960s. By the end of the 1960s, all of those old studio heads, like Louis B. Mayer and Jack Warner, all of those studio heads were gone because they completely lost touch with the audience. And the studios were in financial peril. And it was basically the only way to survive as studios was, number one, to become part of big conglomerates, to be bought out by bigger companies, and then to get rid of the management that had been in place since the classical period, and to have younger management that's more in tune with the younger audience that was becoming the main audience for movies at this time, because older audiences were staying home watching television. They weren't going out to the movies as much as younger people. So let's see how this Lloyd Krogan stealing our idea, our bad idea thing, is probably one of those signs, I hope, of the collapse of his studio. But I don't know where that's going. Let's see where this goes, perhaps in the next chapter. Chapter 4, it looks like we are ready to begin production. Pre-production, I guess, was limited to this one day on the set doing some screen tests. And it looks like we are now in production. And Zemi, our assistant, almost killed somebody in my Bentley. An update on the production and how it's going. Crew stress is higher at 75%. And I'm not sure there's much change in the screenplay. And let's see, now we have a new thing, production. Acting, directing, craft. I guess that's anticipating like what the quality of these things would be in the finished product. And it looks like only craft seems to be above water here, above 50%. We want to get those stats to the lowest possible level. The crew stress stat, I feel like that's so much of an I don't know like what the proper stress we want to emphasize is. Like I said before, do we want stress over the movie, which is what I don't want to have. I don't want people stressing over the movie, because then the movie will probably be terrible if no one's worrying about it. But I do want the crew to be personally stressed. I want them to feel like they're in an out of control production, and that there's no direction or no vision, and that basically they are on a disaster. The screenplay, I do want to be as original and intellectual as possible, but also as relaxing as possible, even though it is a romantic comedy with social satire set in the exotic streets of Morocco. In other words, a recipe for disaster. Now, my own personal status, stress at 58%, and I'm putting people before the project. That's bad for the project, right? That's what I want to continue doing. I'm going to continue to put the people first. My relationship with Josie and the grip Tarn are going very well. Nothing happening with Vincent. Now we are on B stage. It's the first day of production. Now I need to be there, like as the director. I mean, the producer doesn't necessarily have to be on the set. Certainly the writer doesn't have to be anywhere near the set. But of course, the director has to be there. Nothing can happen until the director says action. Nobody can talk to the actors, and the cameras can't run without the director there. Now, what do I say to the crew? A pep talk. I say I'm excited and privileged. Thank you for helping me realize my dream. And Carter Whitlock, the star, the weed, I should say, gives me a beautiful smile. And now Vincent, the assistant director, has a question. What kind of a pace are we shooting for? Do we want to do a lot of takes, or do we want quick and cheap? Interesting. I'm going for I'm going for chaos here. We need chaos. And the choices here are interesting. You can either give actors all the time they want, let the crew take all the time they want to get things technically perfect. You can keep shooting until everyone is happy, or you can stay on budget and on schedule. Now, to say we'll keep shooting until everyone is happy. Now, what that kind of takes the responsibility off the director in a sense, doesn't it? Because you could choose the actors or the crew. In other words, we're going to shoot for performance quality, which, the crew may think, their work is fine or not fine, but that doesn't matter. What matters is performance. Or you can focus on the crew. You can say, well, the acting doesn't have to be so great, but the crew needs to get things technically right, and we're not going to move on until that's done. To say we'll keep shooting until everyone is happy is basically to say there is no such thing as a schedule. It's just absolutely ridiculous to say we'll keep shooting until everyone is happy. No, you keep shooting until you have to move on. Now you want to keep shooting until that point, right? You don't just stop at the first take unless it's perfect. But you do want to keep shooting until there comes a point where you have to stop. And of course, time is money in movie production, so that will affect the budget as well. All right, so let's do that. We'll keep shooting until everyone is happy, even if that means going over budget. I think this game is going to say that will probably make this a high quality production, but I would probably disagree with that. See, I know what this choice means. This choice probably means we're going to have a high quality movie, according to the terms that the game seems to be setting down. However, I think that this choice, if it was to be made for real, would result in a terrible production where, because if no one is feeling under the gun or the pressure of that time, the time factor that things need to get done by a certain time, then there's a lack of focus. And if you have a lack of focus, when you just think, oh, we'll just shoot for however long it takes, then you're going to wind up with an unfocused production that is not going to come out well. At least that would seem to be the logical result of a lack of a sense of schedule or budget. Now, Vincent is not scribbling that down. What is he writing? Like no schedule, no budget. And then now Carter is asking about the scene. Like, how do we play this? How do we play this? As the director, we have to tell the players how to do the script, like how we're going to treat the script, right? Do we follow the script very carefully? Do we follow the direction very carefully, which could go off script? Or do we just say, do what feels right? The script is just a rough guide. I'm the writer and the producer and the director. I should say, follow the script very carefully. Or I should say, follow my direction as close to, as possible. Instead, I'm going to say, I don't care about my own vision. So do what feels right. The script is just a rough guide. Wow. All right, so here we can make some technical decisions here about how this movie will be shot, in what technical formats. And this is a bit of a historical matter. So it says here you can shoot in black and white, which is still common at the time, especially for B pictures, it says, and it is cheaper. Or shoot in color, which is more expensive but becoming increasingly expected, especially for A pictures. We are going to shoot this in color, which is the wrong choice. As with the rise of television, a host of wider shooting. Okay, the ratio, the aspect ratio. As it says here, that's correct. We have in the 1950s, we have two new formats of aspect ratios of movie production. And the new ones are first what we call widescreen, which is 1.85 by 1. And it says here ultra widescreen, but we can call that the scope format, which is 2.35 by 1. And both of those things, widescreen and scope, were in a way competing against the television format, which, as you know, televisions of the time, of course, were not the rectangular televisions we have today. They were more boxy screen shapes. That was more of the ratio for motion picture making up until the end of the 1940s, that boxy format of 4 by 3 or 1.37 by 1. And now we can choose to do it in that format, right? Or we can do widescreen or ultra wide. I think if the goal here is to have a failed production, we want to have the Academy ratio, because that way we are limiting the appeal of this movie as something that would compete with television. And even though it's cheaper, which would be a good reason to do the Academy ratio, it is going to be one less thing you can trumpet in the posters and in the publicity for the movie that would get people to watch the movie in a movie theater, as opposed to, let's say, that night staying home and watching television. So we're going to save money, but we're also going to severely limit the commercial appeal of this movie, as if it wasn't already extremely limited. So we'll shoot this in the Academy ratio. And let's see now, who should be the one to click the first slate on the production? And this would be basically the sound check for the camera, which is, you have the clapper board that you clap that board, then you have the sound synchronized with it when you go into post-production. And also you have on the slate, it's written down what scene and take it is for reference. This is all for the editor later to look at. And actually, I might be the editor for this. Daisy might be the editor, because that's what Daisy did for 10 years at the studio that Daisy quit. So who should do it? Now, this, I guess, is going to affect relationships here. And I want my niece to do the honors here, because my niece is the most important person on the set. So Josie will do the honors. And I just unlocked an achievement, production. I put this movie in production. I didn't get an achievement called Best Aunt Ever, which would be the achievement I just did in Josie's point of view. But anyway, so Josie hits the clapper, and the scene. So scene 14 is Carter's, leader of the band of socialites, has an amusing misunderstanding that snowballs into a ridiculous misadventure, kicking off the plot. And it's done with improvisation, leaping straight into the bashful heart of the character. And it's going to be a delight when we see the footage. I doubt that very strongly. And it looks like the my direction from earlier. So when I told the cast and crew, do whatever you have to do to make it perfect, it looks like that's what was achieved here, but it took longer than the schedule allowed. So we're already over schedule on the first day. This is what happens. And usually when you fall behind, you can't get that back. It just snowballs into more and more delays and more and more over expenditures. The AD, that would be Vincent, calls check the gate. That means check the camera. And the round of applause. We got through the first morning, or the first scene. And we are now doing lunch. Oh, now Zemi has informed us we have a couple of unauthorized visitors on the set. Zemi is alarmed by this. Now, I shouldn't care about this whatsoever. This is okay by me. I'm running a very loose set here that even though I'm telling the actors and the crew to be perfectionists, that's another way of saying I am losing all control of this set. So basically, I don't care who wanders in and out. I'm telling the actors to improvise. So hey, maybe this will be a great opportunity if someone wanders onto the set. Put them in the movie. Now, who are these people though? So it looks like one of them I don't recognize. The other has a profile so distinct it's been parodied around the town for years. It's Krogan. All right, so our former boss has decided to crash the set with an unknown accomplice, I guess we'll say. Interesting. He strides over. Sorry to drop in unannounced. Just want to offer congratulations. Well, that's nice. That's nice. And I'm not hiding my disdain and paranoia. My first thing to him to say is, oh, so you're also shooting a romantic comedy, hint, hint, hint. And he says, you were ahead of me on that one, Flack. I'll admit. And then it says 6 months ago, all the polls started telling us the comedy genre was hot again. Didn't see it coming. Now, this is completely ahistorical. It's a good thing I chose the romantic comedy before knowing this was in the 1950s, because as it is the case today, back in the 1950s, comedy was a less revered genre, shall we say, than other genres that were emerging, like the historical epic or like the family melodrama. Like those were the big, like high demand genres of the time. Comedy was less in demand for obvious reasons. You have a lot of comedy on television. So comedy was not something audiences demanded in movies. So for Lloyd Krogan to come in and say, we have polls telling us that comedy is back. I don't know what he's talking about. But anyway, so he says he didn't see that coming. Well, obviously. So this is a sign that Krogan is doomed, that the studio that Krogan is leading is doomed. If they're gonna invest in comedy in the 1950s, they're gone. Now, what do I do here? Do I do the polite but painful thing? Do I simply ignore this and just ask Krogan to leave? Or do I simply feel my oats and just say, get off my set, you so-and-so? Well, I mean, I like having Lloyd here as an agent of chaos, let's say. So let's do the polite and painful thing and let Lloyd hang around. You're too kind, Daisy. Lloyd says, I am too kind. I'm not a good director, producer, or writer, but I do know how to treat the wrong people right. Lloyd steps aside, and so here's who Lloyd is with, an old friend. And this is Congressman Jonathan Creed, the head of the new committee for the investigation of Hollywood un-Americanism. So politics has reared its ugly head once again in the figure of a congressman who is visiting the set, I assume, to find out if there's anyone on that set who has affiliation with a communist organization or has communist tendencies. And this is bad news. And but now, of course, the way I'm doing this through this playthrough is making all the morally wrong choices here. And that would probably be good for my career, but bad for my soul, let's say. So I'm going to handle this, I guess, as the morally bad person. So I'm supposed to actually be happy that we have someone here overseeing the production. Creed extends a hand politely. So this is the man who's hoping to clean up Hollywood and root out the subversives and the communists. He says, you hope you'll be able to help him. See, that's now consistent with my character so far. And so Creed is not described in very flattering terms. Balding, tortoiseshell glasses, professionally distant smile, the demeanor of a man who's quietly waited all his life to come to power, and now that he's had a taste, finds it sweeter than he ever expected. Interesting parallels here, I suppose, between, let's say, the anti-communist movement that is now empowered to root out people from certain industries, and the Hollywood industry, where, like I was saying earlier, once someone gets a little bit of power, sometimes it gets to their head and they become basically an overbearing individual who is just paranoid and self-obsessed and trying to just wield power over everyone. I see a parallel here being drawn between those who want to succeed in the Hollywood industry and those who want to succeed in an anti-communist government. Flack, he says incorrectly, which I put out, I was not called Dr. Flack by Congressman Creed. But Creed says, kudos on your new studio. And he's hired staffers to watch over the production. And now my response would be that rooting out the Reds is a dirty job. I'm grateful someone's doing it. Well, that would have to be my response as the morally bankrupt studio head. So Creed is happy about that. Communism is the greatest threat the country faces. And absolutely, you can count on me, sir. And Creed takes out a copy of the script. It looks like there are things in it Creed doesn't like. And now here's where you actually see an interesting relationship between government and the industry, because the censorship system of movies has never been government owned, at least not in the US. It's always been an industry driven system of censorship. And part of the reason for that was simply to keep government out of the film industry. However, you have these now, sometimes you have these entanglements. Clearly, one of them was obviously during World War II, when the Hollywood studio system was very much entangled with the US government to produce movies that would have very positive images of the war, of America's role in the war, basically making kind of propaganda for the government through movies. Now you have something similar going on in the post-war period, when now you have an anti-communist movement, where if movies can contribute to that, then the government would have great support of a production like that, something that was anti-communist. But if you were to go the other way and to have a movie that represented the anti-communist movement as evil, as something that was to be stopped, then you would have a lot of resistance from the government there. And so you have some self-censorship going on here in the industry, which is to say, look, it's not like you have to make movies that are overtly against communism, but we don't want to make movies that would offend those government entities that are trying to root out communism, or as they see their mission being to root out communism from the industry. And also just to keep things as non-political as possible. So there's a lot of self-censorship in the industry, to the point where they were blacklisting individuals who maybe weren't writing movies that had pro-communist messages, but were simply associated in their personal life with a communist organization, even at a second and third hand, right? So you can see where Creed is coming in here as like, where does Creed have the right to say this? Well, there's no right to say this, right? Because legally speaking, the industry can make whatever movies it wants. But you have this, let's say, this culture of anti-communism. It's not just a policy, it's a culture. And Creed is kind of exploiting that culture here to say, here in this script, there are elements, what are called elements here, that are problematic. And I guess we set ourselves up for this by having a controversial romantic comedy that is intellectual. And it looks like Creed has filled the script with red pen marks. Whole scenes are crossed out with a large red X. These changes would seriously undermine your picture. There's no question about it. But you know, he has the power to cause your studio serious problems if you don't comply with his wishes. Well, I guess we're just going to have to go along with this, right? I could say I'm not changing a word. That's interesting. That would actually jeopardize the production in a way that, as the one trying to make all the wrong choices here, would actually be a good thing to jeopardize the production. But let's just continue what we were doing here, which is we have a morally bankrupt studio head who is going to be very happy that these changes were made by Creed. In other words, we're going to compromise our entire movie because some government hack comes in and just basically dictates to us what should be done. That speaks to a lack of vision, a lack of sense of responsibility, not to mention a moral failing there. So I don't see how this movie can have even a chance in the world of succeeding. It won't even be it won't even be an authentic vision. I mean, my vision, Daisy Flack's vision of this movie is a terrible one, but if it gets on the screen, at least that vision is achieved. It would probably be a massive failure, but at least it would be Daisy's vision. But I'm going to have Daisy compromise that vision immediately based on what Creed is telling Daisy to do. So it would not even be a realized vision. It'll be an unrealized vision that will also fail. So Creed nods. I'm sure I can count on your assistance. There are reds everywhere in Hollywood. God, this is a good reflection of the paranoia that was going on at the time, the Red Scare. That only it says only by working together can we root them out. So it's like an us versus them kind of thing. And what's so interesting is how you had movies coming out that of all genres that reflected this kind of imagining of the world of an us versus them. And in broad terms, that would be mapped onto, let's say, the West versus the East, the Western powers versus Eastern powers. But it would trickle down into just simple things like horror movies that would have invasions from outer space, right? That would be, I mean, an allegory of what's going on nationally in policy and in what we see here in government investigations of communism. So you can see how things trickle down from government policy to what we see on the screen at this time in the 1950s. And it's not that all these movies were bad, like all these movies that would depict this kind of us versus them thing. It's not like they were automatically bad movies. It was just that it was simply of its time. It was simply overdetermined by the political system and the culture in which it was at the time. But my goal here is to make a bad one, right? To make a bad movie. And Zemi is backing me up as always. Now the set that we're working on now has an us versus them kind of thing. Like, who are the them now? Are there communists on our set? Can we identify them? And if we do identify them, how will we report them to the authorities and so forth? So now we have a completely divided set here along ideological lines. But the rest of the day's shoot goes well. Looks like I'm handling the task as best as I can, mostly managing to stick to the schedule, mostly managing. Carter is doing pretty well. He's pretty funny. And my role as producer is taking shape. It says some producers treat their crews like a pirate captain under siege. And on the other hand, some prefer a quieter approach, choosing politeness over efficiency. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, you get all types. But which one am I as a producer now? As a producer, do I drive the crew hard, see what they're capable of achieving, or do I treat them well, build a family, warts and all? Or do I try to find an even balance? When the director is also the producer, it's an interesting thing because basically you have to be of two minds, right? You have, as the director, you have the vision. As the producer, you're constantly looking at the schedule and you're looking at the budget. Of course, there's usually an agreement on what the vision is. The producer wouldn't hire a director if they had completely different ideas of what the production should be. But when it comes to day-to-day management, what the director is doing and what the producer is doing are usually very different things. And a lot of times there gets to be conflict between the two, where the producer is always concerned with the money going out the door, that's flying out the door, the longer it takes to shoot things and so forth. Whereas the director may be more focused on the vision and on the quality of the work, and there might be some clashes there. But what happens when the producer and the director are the same person, as in this case? If my choice is to have a really bad production, like what should I do here? Should I treat the crew well or should I drive them hard? I'm going to say try to find an even balance, because that's like a wishy-washy kind of way to be. A producer shouldn't be changing their approach every other day. One thing the producer needs to be is constant. Like there needs to be a consistency in a producer's behavior to have a productive set. So you can be hard driving, you can be easygoing, but as long as you're consistent, at least you'll have a force. You will be a force on the set if you are consistent. So I'm going to try to find an even balance here, which means to be inconsistent and therefore unlikely to have much authority or response from the crew or the director, which is also me. Okay, as the day moves on, you and the crew start to develop a rapport. We're not going to see the dailies till tomorrow night. We feel that the Green Promise is off to a great start. How deluded are we at this point? And now here's Josie coming to report on something I guess she overheard in the diner, where she sees some big Hollywood mogul types and describes one of them as a funny looking skinny guy with a bow tie and a nasty smelling cigar. And that sounds like our friend Krogan, who I didn't know this, but Krogan also seems to be a fan of bow ties. So maybe I got that affectation from him. But anyway, so Josie is my spy. Josie is reporting on what Lloyd was saying without realizing Josie was listening. And my achievement unlocked, spy kid. Thanks, Josie. Now Josie is reporting that Lloyd is talking about publicizing a new romantic comedy. And I guess the other person was a publicity person. And let's see. Josie says that the movie they're making is nothing like The Green Promise, nothing like our movie. And so I guess Krogan isn't totally ripping us off. And that results in a huge wave of relief. People are always looking for justifications for their own paranoia. Well, in this case, there is no justification. So Polka Dot Bowtie Entertainment will have a original story that won't look like a lower budget copycat, which almost certainly spells disaster. Not necessarily. A low budget copycat of some big budget production would not necessarily be a disaster. I mean, it could even be a superior work, considering if the big budget production was boring to audiences. You can have a lower budget version of the same story that's a little more exciting, especially if it's made by an independent company that is not so worried about huge budgets and making things acceptable to all audiences. And now Josie is offering to be a bit more of a spy, saying she found out where the secretary's office is, and maybe Josie can climb up in the hedge and sneak through the window. Am I going to allow that or not? Absolutely not. Tempting, but or I'll show you how to jimmy a window. Do I want Josie to keep spying? No, I don't think so. That would be, I want Josie on the set being a distraction there. I don't want Josie out, doing things that are going to increase my ability to do my job better. So let's say absolutely not, Josie. You're going to stay here on the set and cause trouble here, not elsewhere. And so Josie says she got the idea from a movie, obviously. And you're the best, Flack. So she skitters off. I can't imagine life without her. That's an interesting reflection for my character. Let's see. Now I'm tired. There's a celebratory mood on the set. So what would I like to do? Well, we want to indulge and splurge. Let's see. Do we want to? Oh, we have the opportunity to pursue a relationship with the grip, Tarn. That would be probably the worst thing for the production. So, but also I can also go for milkshakes with Josie. I think my relationship with Josie is pretty solid. So I really do want to pursue this disastrous relationship with Tarn. So let's do that. So I take Tarn to a quiet Italian place just outside of town, and I'm asking Tarn questions. Tell me everything, Tarn. Tell me everything about yourself. And Tarn is cautious, says he's just a stagehand, and I'm pushing Tarn to say more. And Tarn says, well, everyone has a story. That doesn't mean everyone's got a right to hear mine. All right, being the cautious type. Tarn seems to have a better understanding of what to do and not to do during a production than Daisy. So let's hope Tarn keeps his composure. Well, actually, in this case, we don't want Tarn to keep his composure. We want Tarn to give in. That would result in a drama on the set. And so I'm a little bit awkward, trying to pry a little more out of Tarn. And Tarn says, maybe I should just go. And then I say, don't you dare. And so things are loosening up a little with Tarn. And Tarn now wants to know how I became a big shot producer. And I'm not going to let them off that easy. I'm going to press to know more about Tarn. It's not about me. It's about you. Tell me about being a grip. Yeah, it's fun to talk to people who work these technical jobs on movies because they have this proximity to what we would call, the magic of movie making, which, we imagine like what it's like to make a movie in romantic terms, which is you have make believe, you have storytelling, you have people pretending to be someone else, basically the actors and the director. The performers in front of the camera performing and the director behind the camera calling the action. But you have all these other people, of course, around the scene, like observing and also making sure that things are done correctly. So they have this proximity to what we would call the magic of things. But they also don't have the status, like they don't have that protected status that creates a kind of shield between, let's say, the performers, the director, perhaps the producer, and let's say those on the outside who want to know more about what it's like to be inside. So you get a lot more interesting stories from those who work technical jobs on sets versus those who may have bigger status positions or more responsibility, and yet maybe a little more cagey, a little more cautious on explaining the way things are done. So Tarn says just likes to have a job well done and likes to go home at the end of the day and forget about it, forget about work. So Tarn seems to be approaching the industry as someone who wants work-life balance, someone who doesn't want to put everything into the job and wants to have a home life, a private life. And I asked, why work in the movies then? You could be a mechanic, so why Hollywood? And the reason Tarn says that says because you meet the damnedest people in this business, Daisy. Tarn is, I guess, in the school of life, just wants to be in interesting places doing interesting things, but not being someone who has a lot of responsibility or someone who has this public reputation. And it looks like I'm getting Tarn to say more. And it's kind of a romantic image we're getting here of this dinner. We both love Hollywood. And there's this romanticized version of things, the impossible made effortless. And we're talking very warmly about the magic of Hollywood. And I guess one of Tarn's hobbies is building model airplanes. Well, Tarn refers to someone named Mel. Mel. And Mel, I ask, who is this Mel? And I guess that results in a close. So Tarn closes off discussion of Mel. And now I have to assume Mel is either an ex of Tarn's, or maybe an estranged family member, or change the subject to something else. Should I tell Tarn? I want to know more. I want to know who Mel is. So do I tell Tarn about an ex of mine? Do I tell Tarn about family problems that I have, or change the subject to something less risky? I'm going to change the subject to something less risky because I do want Tarn to be relaxed here. I want Tarn to fall under my spell. So the more I pressure Tarn into, saying things he doesn't want to say, then things might not go as well. So we're going to change the subject. And now we talk about movies we like. And Tarn likes simple stories well told. Likes the silent period, mentions these very famous movies, Sunrise, City Lights, The Last Laugh. So two of those movies, Sunrise and The Last Laugh, were made by the same director, the German director, F.W. Murnau. Made The Last Laugh in Germany in the early 1920s, and then made Sunrise in Hollywood at 20th Century Fox in the late 1920s. And I mean, at that time, the 1920s, German cinema was considered to be of the highest quality in terms of artistic achievement. And so F.W. Murnau, who was a very respected director in Germany, making The Last Laugh, which was an international success, was invited to come to Hollywood to make movies in that way, in a very with what we call German expressionist technique, and made Sunrise, which was the first movie, one of the first movies to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. The other title, City Lights, is a Charlie Chaplin production. And so Tarn is a real little nostalgic for those old silent movies. Doesn't like color pictures and thinks it's a waste of money to put things in color, and likes things painted with light. Do I say that's beautiful? Do I say you shouldn't really talk like that around other people? Or there's, I want Tarn to like me, so I'm going to say that's beautiful. I probably myself, as Daisy Flack, probably doesn't think that, but I'm going to pretend I do. And let's see. So Tarn feels that that's good. He's getting to know me just a little bit. Okay, the next morning we wake up and get the morning paper, and there's a headline there about our movie. So Flack Romantic Comedy starts production with Whitlock. And the story, I'm going to actually read this. Tiny newcomer, Polka Dot Bowtie Entertainment's lot was bustling with activity yesterday as director Daisy Flack began shooting The Green Promise, the upstart studio's eyebrow-raising guffaw fest. Spirits were high on set, bolstered by surprise visitor Lloyd Krogan, delivering well wishes to former protege Flack. Production is off to a smash start, despite some casting decisions an industry source describes as bizarre, and word around set is the picture's already over budget. True and true. After a few weeks of studio work, the struggling independent's next challenge, a tricky location shoot. I guess we're going to Morocco to make this movie, which would be absolutely insane. But I guess that's the plan. Then it says, whatever hack reporter dredged this up is right about one thing. The location shoot's going to be your toughest challenge yet. This is the end of this chapter. I'm a little concerned about the pace of this game at this point. It seems to be a little slow, or maybe I'm just slow going through it. But I do hope that we're at least more than halfway through this. I know we're building relationships and doing things. I know that's the progress that we're making one way or the other. But I do hope we're not going through every single day of production.